Hi, welcome to this content slam on the first third of the World Order topic. Let's get straight into it to save time. I know you have short attention spans. So the first two skills that the syllabus asked us to look at was discuss the concept of world order and describe the need for world order. For me, I can't see how those two can be broken apart. We can understand both of these concepts by looking at two different sets of content. And the content we need to look at is understand the need for world order and the meaning of world order. That's also coming from the syllabus. That's just from the students learn about side. So let's dive in on that. So human race has been had a pretty terrible track record: colonization, the transatlantic slave trade, World War One, World War Two, the expansion of the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. Again and again throughout history, we've wrought enormous violence on each other. So that disruption continues to this day. Colonization is still hugely disruptive to the rest of the world. The effects of World War One and World War Two still dictate modern politics. It's not like this stuff's in the past. It continues to affect us to this day. In addition to that, if we want to quantify it in terms of financial terms, it's cost us trillions and trillions of dollars wasted, and also hundreds of millions of life have been just destroyed by this process of humans basically being awful to each other. So a system of world order is all about having a dispute resolution mechanism. Instead of going to war and destroying hundreds of millions of people and wasting literally fortunes and having long-lasting legacy of disaster wrought on communities, we have a system of trying to resolve disputes and make things work better. So by resolving disputes, we hope to prevent conflict and encourage development, get nations to move forward. And this is really what world order is. This is the very essence of it. Let's have an orderly system for dealing with each other. Let's not just constantly be slaughtering each other to get our own way. So world order is a system of domestic and international laws which regulate how countries relate to each other. Is probably not a bad definition. So the current system we have is the United Nations Charter 1945. We'll talk about that more in a bit, but that's the current system of world order. It's established under that piece of international law. It outlines exactly what it sets out to do in the preamble. There's 4 points. I'm going to fly through that very quickly. The first point says to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in their lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. This is a direct reference to World War I and World War II and the immense devastation that was brought on the world, and this commitment never to let that happen again. Secondly, to reaffirm the faith in fundamental human rights. I won't read all of that. It's about saying that during World War I and II, human life was incredibly cheap. We had 20 million Chinese people die, 30 million Russians die, 6 million Jewish people die. Life was almost meaningless. And we're saying no, that every human being deserves respect and worth. Thirdly, to establish conditions under which justice and respect for obligations arising from treaties can be maintained. And that's saying that the international law that countries sign or the treaties that countries sign should be respected and upheld. It's about ensuring that under this system, if a country signs something, we want them to stick to it. We want countries to be predictable and reliable in their actions. We can't just let countries sign and disregard. And so that's another main goal of the current world order system. And fourthly, and possibly most importantly, is to promote social progress, to provide a better standard of living for all of us. Not just these points are largely about let's not do terrible things to each other. This fourth point is about let's do good in the world. Let's improve people's condition. Let's expand the situation that the humans find themselves in. Okay, so we had to understand how world order has evolved over time, because it didn't just come out of nowhere in 1945. In fact, there's four distinct things. We have the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. We have the Congress of Vienna in 1815. We have World War I and we have World War II. And each of these four events established really important stepping stones or conceptual leaps in the way that we consider world order. So Westphalia gave us the concept of state sovereignty. The Congress of Vienna gave us this first move towards multilateralism. World War I gave the world the first attempt at trying to produce some sort of international government. And World War II, at the end of it, produced another form of international government, the United Nations, which we still have today. It's not perfect, but at least it's lasting, or it's lasted for a number of years at this point. So let's have a really quick look at what happened in each of those. Treaty of Westphalia was happening because there was a breakdown in the Holy Roman Empire, and there was a 30-year war going on. largely between Spain, France, and Netherlands. There was an end of the Holy Roman Empire, as mentioned, but also there was this great break apart happening inside the Catholic Church, which was creating this huge violence and conflict. Anyway, these countries kept meddling with each other and destroying each other and really stopping each other from progressing. At some point, the countries realized that we need to just allow each other to be and run our own course and respect each other's borders. And that was this concept of state sovereignty. I am my own country. I can do as I please. Please respect that. So the Congress of Vienna is largely about Napoleon. So the Treaty of Westphalia sorted out a lot of the conflicts. There was still conflict, but no huge major disruption throughout Europe. But then Napoleon marches along, and between the years of 1792 and 1815, he really dominates Europe. His armies marching across Europe and taking capital cities at will, virtually. That eventually came to the end of the Battle of Waterloo. However, before the Battle of Waterloo, they were made to sign the Vienna Convention. And we'll get back to that Geneva Convention point in just one second. But the key idea of the Congress of Vienna is that countries need to work together to achieve certain outcomes. Yes, we are separate states, but also there's certain things that we all have an interest. For instance, we all need our soldiers protected, our injured soldiers protected during war. We all need to be able to access the ports of neutral allies, people who are not involved in the war. Why do we have to have these individual agreements? So Germany has an agreement with France, but that doesn't apply to Austria or Italy. If we all agree to something, let's just have an agreement we all agree to. And that's multilateralism, is that the world can work together towards mutual goals. An example of a multilateralism is the Geneva Convention, which basically said that all soldiers should be protected if they're wounded and should be free from being injured by the alternative army. Okay, so the Treaty of Vienna, this idea, things did pretty well in Europe for a while. There was still conflict, but fundamentally nothing upsetting until World War I came along, and that was essentially between UK and Germany and their allies, 1914 to 1918. It resulted in 16 million deaths, and the UK won this, and its allies. Australia was involved. That's where Australia was involved at Gallipoli. That's where that was going on, but they made them sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1918, and it really was a humiliating treaty for Germany. It really made Germany take all of the blame for the war, and it set up largely World War II, but we won't get to that in this, unfortunately. It also, under the Treaty of Versailles, it also produced the League of Nations, which was this idea of let's have an international government that helps regulate some of the things that we're experiencing, make sure people get on better. However, there was an issue with this, is the UK and the USA did not join. They did not want their powers curbed by, or their sovereignty curbed by some sort of international government. And also there was very little mechanism for enforcement, and that was proved because in a couple of years then Japan invaded China, Italy invaded Ethiopia, and Germany then goes and invades Poland a bit later on, and nothing happens. And so the League of Nations falls apart. So Germany invading Poland was all part of World War II, and this is Hitler invading Europe. He wanted to establish a Third Reich. He had a Japanese alliance. Anyway, this was an amazingly devastating war. 60 million deaths, 20 million Chinese, 30 million Russians, and 6 million Jewish people died there. It also had 2 nuclear bombs detonated on 2 Japanese cities. Just this horrendous loss of life. Anyway, at the end of this, it produced the United Nations Charter. The world was deeply traumatized by World War II. We just could not believe we could do such incredible damage to each other. So the United Nations Charter was ruled, and all world powers signed up. However, the major powers only signed on the basis they had veto. The major powers at the time was Russia, USA, France, UK, and China, and they still possess the power of veto to this day. They dealt with this issue of enforceability because the Security Council has the ability to authorize force. And it also produced a General Assembly where all nations of the world, there's now 193, can come together and discuss and to cooperate and sign treaties and work issues out together. Okay, let's quickly finish off here. So also we need to talk about, explain the implications for the nature of conflict in achieving world order. So the different types of conflict we have is going to make it harder to resolve. So let's have a quick look at those. We're going to look at the nature of conflict. There are 2 different types, interstate and intrastate. Interstate means between countries. Oh, sorry, we're also going to talk about how the access to resources can be a source of conflict. So one of the key forms of interstate conflict is conventional warfare. We also have cold warfare. We also have cyber warfare. Intrastate consists of civil war, guerrilla warfare, and terrorism. That's where there's a conflict happening within the country. Interstate is where one country, Australia, takes on Poland. We fight each other, 2 countries. Intrastate is where there's a battle happening inside of that country. So someone within Australia wants to fight the Australian government. Australians fighting Australians, for instance. Okay, so conventional warfare is very easy to spot. People have uniforms and flags. It's all about capturing and holding territory. Classic example of that is the Iraq War of 2003, World War One, World War Two. It's very easy to spot this classic idea of two armies facing off against each other. A Cold War is much different. There's no shot fired. So if conventional wars are often referred to as hot wars because people are shooting at each other, it's a heated conflict. Cold Wars is there's no shots fired. In fact, two countries face off through proxy wars, through an arms race. And the most recent example of that is the USSR and USA between 1945 and 1991. Cyber warfare is also common. This is where digital infrastructure is attacked. So what you do is you gain access to electricity grids, telecommunications, you get state secrets, commercial secrets. You can steal it from another country and use it to your advantage, or you can even gain access to their networks and do real world damage. There's a really good example of this in the Sydney Morning Herald, May 2013. An ASIO building, the Australian secret security intelligence organization, had built a brand new building for $60 million, and those plans were hacked, they believe, by the Chinese government. And that meant that these people, potentially the Chinese government, had this great information on our high-tech building, and it made it almost useless. So they've had to spend millions of more dollars fixing it all up. Civil war is when people within a country fight against the government. Civil wars are very common. The USA was forged out of a civil war. France was formed out of a civil war. Syria is currently engaged in a civil war. Guerrilla warfare is a Spanish term. Guerrilla means little war or little fight in Spanish. And that's basically hit and run. You are a much smaller force, but you run out and you're trying to fight a larger army. So you do a little bit of damage, you blow up a power station, then you run away. It's not about this capturing and holding territory. It's about slowly coming through, doing damage and running off. Ireland used this technique between 1916 to 1921, and Cuba, the Cuban Revolution, used that in 1959. That's the Che Guevara. Terrorism is different to guerrilla warfare because they aim to hit innocent people. It's about creating fear and terror. And what that does is that if you get the population scared enough, they'll put pressure on their government to act in certain ways. So if the terrorist group wants, say, America out of the Middle East, what they'll do is they attack the American people. The American people get very scared and say, how do we make this how do we make these attacks stop? I know, government, we want you to come out of the Middle East. And that way the terrorists get what they want. Okay, classic example of that is September 11, the World Trade Center in the USA, and also the Pentagon. Okay, now let's quickly move on, finish this up. Access to resources is a source of conflict. So resources are really important because they give companies economic strength, and they're an absolute necessity. We need oil to run, we need food, we need gold, we need minerals, we need coal. All of that stuff needs to be accessed. So a really pertinent example of that's a 1973 oil shock from the USA. And what happened is the US had been supporting Israel, and there was an oil embargo placed on the US by the Arab countries. And that meant they wouldn't sell them oil. Now, that shot the price of barrel right up from $3 to $12 per barrel, and this led to 24% inflation on everything in the USA. Oil is in everything. The truck that delivers food to your supermarket, the car that got you to school or gets you to wherever today, it all runs on oil. The shoes on your feet were driven to the shop through a truck. And so that means if the truck gets more expensive, everything gets more expensive. The shoe will be increased to make up for the cost of the oil. So everything in the USA got 24%, the economy 24% more expensive, and the economy ground to a halt. This is discussed in The Guardian in May of 2003, which talks about the long-term impact. Now, to secure that oil supply, the USA realized they were very vulnerable. They then engaged in a number of different acts. So they invaded Iraq in 1991, or Iraq had invaded Kuwait, and they stepped up very quickly to push Iraq out of Kuwait. 100,000 people died in that instance. Also, again, Iraq in 2003, 500,000 people died. However, that war is probably, we could still argue, still raging, and currently Daesh is the current manifestation of that conflict. However, there's another example too of resources being an issue. The Arab Spring, which was this huge uprising throughout many of the Arab nations, Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, even Syria, I think, was probably connected with that, is driven by a couple of things. First of all, people wanted democracy, no doubt. They wanted change in government. However, also, between 2010 and 2011, the wheat price doubled. The global wheat price doubled. Now, for Australians, that doesn't matter. We can afford to buy a loaf of bread if it's $2 or if it's $4. But for very poor people, this is a really big problem. So with this doubling, and that's discussed in The Guardian in May of 2012, with this doubling, people are angry and they step out in the streets and they can't eat as much and their children are hungry. And so they step on the streets and demand their governments to take action. And if they don't take action, then they uprise. And while, yes, democracy is important and there's a number of religious and political things at play here, the wheat price was really important in getting people angry enough to really hit the streets and start protesting against their governments. But also, there's a discussion that climate change is going to make this more likely. Climate change is going to increase drought, flood and storm, which is going to wipe out more food crops, make accessing resources more difficult, and it's projected that we'll continue to have more problems. Okay, that's it. 15 minutes. I'm sorry it took so long, but it's very important. Please review this. All the best.